Welcome back to Fish Fridays. I'm your host, Brandon Knight. This is a special bonus series brought to you by My Seminary Life, where we're walking through the season of Lent, talking about the history, the practices, the observances behind this season on the church calendar as we prepare for Good Friday and ultimately Easter. And for today's episode, obviously when you're in this high liturgical church environment, there are sermons related to this season. You have specific topics. It's a sermon series, basically, for those of us in the low liturgical context. And so today we're going to do something that I at least have never done on the show. I've done plenty of times on my way home from church. We're going to talk about a sermon and review it and hopefully not rip it apart, because I at least enjoyed the reading of it. And to do this, I have invited our good friend Joshua Noel back on the show. Josh, welcome back. I've lost track how many times you've been here.
That's my goal. I hope to guest so often that when I'm in seminary, people are like, is this like his seminary life? That's the goal. I want them to question.
That's Josh's show, right? And by extension, that's TJ's show, right? Because
has TJ ever been on?
He did the one where me and him, we talked about the convention you went to back in the fall.
I was about to say, how fun would it be if people thought TJ was attached and he's never been on?
Right. Oh, that would be very impressive. Goals right there. Because TJ just goes along. It's just an assumption. TJ is a part of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So in today's episode, like I said, we're going to talk about a sermon, but we're not going to talk about any of mine. We're going to indulge the cliche today, because as we've been talking each week here on Fish Fridays, Lent is not just that Catholic Church thing. It is a liturgical church thing. Many different, even Protestant denominations, the Eastern Orthodox Church, a lot of us observe Lent. But today we're going to be a little bit more stereotypical as we look at Pope Francis's message for Lent this year. He always gives one big address at least each Lent season to kick things off. I believe it was on Ash Wednesday is when this message came out. I will post a link to this both in the description of this episode and also just on social media for people who want to read it for themselves. Josh, you have read it, right?
Yeah. That's actually my second favorite church leader named Francis. So,
yes.
Yeah, he's going to be on the season 2 of Whole Church.
Good.
So the joke goes.
That is a big Francis. The first Francis is a big Francis, but that's a very big Francis to have, Pope Francis.
I feel like he eats pretty healthily, though, so he'll be fine.
He will be fine. He'll fit onto the... He will be fine. So I wanted to have you on this episode, particularly because I do not have in my life any devout Catholic people. I don't know how I managed to pull that off. I have family members who are more of the Christmas and Easter Catholic people, but I don't know any like Catholic ministers. So it made sense to me to ask the whole church guy to come talk about a Catholic homily. So we got a Pentecostal Lutheran, a Reformed existentialist together to talk about a Catholic guy. So this should be
an episode of Whole Church.
This should be an episode of Whole Church.
Oh man.
Yes.
I like that I'm your backup Catholic. Like I don't have a Catholic, so here's the second string.
Here's my backup option. If you can't have Brett Favre, you can have Aaron Rodgers, like whatever. I guess it works.
Yeah. I mean, I'll take second string. It's fine.
It's fine. So let's start off by doing something that is very distasteful that people should not normally do when they talk about sermons. I did not watch this. I only read it. Did you? You just read it?
No, I only read it. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So let's just start very mundane. On a scale of...
yes!
On a scale of 1 to 5. We'll go 1 to 5. Based off of the content of this message, what do you think?
I've always wanted to rate a sermon, and it's just so funny that the first sermon that I get to rate on air is like the Catholic sermon.
The Catholic sermon.
Honestly, man, like a 2.5. Like,
Okay.
I feel like the average sermon I hear is pretty similar. Like, it didn't stand out to me. I liked
Okay.
everything he said. I'm not sure I'll remember it, honestly. I liked
Okay.
everything he said, though. So it's just kind of like, it was average.
So good, but nothing
Yeah.
noteworthy,
Yeah, not
particularly.
something that I'm going to like be calling somebody up later, like, man, you're not going to believe what he said. Completely eye open. I was like, yeah, I mean, I feel like most Christians should know this, which it's good to do stuff, to talk about stuff people already know,
Sure.
which makes reading sermons hard, right? Because sometimes you just need the average, here is what Lent is, or here is the gospel
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
need to stand out every time. But
Yeah,
if you're going to
maybe
rate
for
it,
right. Maybe for a very timely reference. I know there's been a lot of buzz about that Asbury University. I don't know if you've heard about
oh,
that.
yeah. We're going to be talking
I,
about that on Whole Church News, which is a patron segment for us. So
ooh, look at
I
that
can't
free
give away
plug.
too much. Yeah.
Right. But I know there's been a lot of obviously there's a lot of opinions about what's going on, what has been going on over there, what took place. I went back and I listened to the actual message that started it all, that kicked this all off, and I definitely share your sentiment about what you think about this Pope Francis message of, yeah, that wasn't anything special. But
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be special for a revival / awakening. I'll let you and TJ decide which it was. I'm sure that has to be part of the conversation. But you're right, there is times where it can be a fine message, but we're just covering the basics.
Yeah. Yeah. my dad once. Sorry, I try not to do too many stories, but I feel like this
Sure.
is helpful. My dad's a part-time evangelist, so sometimes he'll go and he'll do these little revivals at different churches and stuff.
Sure.
I say little because we're Pentecostal. Most of our churches are little. Not that I'm like, oh, what a cute little revival. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not trying to downplay it. It was a really cool revival, but he had a whole sermon written out once, and usually,
Mm-hmm.
not just because he's my dad. I usually think that his sermons are pretty good,
Mm-hmm.
but they played the song "These Are the Days of Elijah." These are the days
Ooh,
of
classic.
Moses and all
Yeah.
this. Yeah, and my dad just goes up there and explains what Jubilee was in the Bible, not part of his
Mm-hmm.
sermon at all, and said, "That's it. Come pray." And it was one of the
Oh,
most powerful church services I've been to.
that's cool.
And all they did was, hey, they said this word Jubilee. I'm going to tell you what that word is again, and then listen to this song a little bit closer. And that was the message that was needed. That message, if you're just rating that message, if you just read it, you'd be like, what the heck? This is like a paragraph long, 1 out of 5,
Sure. Right. Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is garbage. But that's what the church needed at that point. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's true. Yeah. So this is kind of on a sliding scale.
Yeah.
Which is why you should not rate sermons on a scale of 1 to 5.
Yeah.
Do as we
are
say,
you
not
also
as we
saying
do.
2.5 then?
No, so I've never really, this sounds very Protestant of me. I've never really paid attention before I've
Yeah.
never been to, I think I was a little kid. The only time I've ever been to a Catholic church wedding. And that's like the only time I've ever really been exposed to like Catholic teaching. This is an area of my life I'm trying to expose more of to myself because I'll save some of those comments for a second when I give my number review, but there's many reasons why. Part of it is just church history. We were all Catholic at one point. That's how this worked. So having never really listened, never really paid attention before, reading it, I was like, oh, this is really good. I agree. It's very simple. And we'll get into more of the nuance of what's going on here in a second. But I was like, this is like a 4 for me. And I think it's because one thing I have enjoyed as I've started listening more to homilies and liturgical preaching is maybe it's just because I grew up with the 3-point Baptist sermon and now the non-denominational super expository preaching. Like today, my pastor preached on one verse for 40 minutes.
Man.
Like, yeah. There is time for that. There's time for when that can be helpful. Like, just, yeah. Anyway, So having been exposed to that for the majority of my life, now that I've been watching Pastor Will and his church and
Mm-hmm.
listening to their sermons, reading this, there's something refreshing about it's almost more lecture-y. It's not
Yeah.
really like a sermon as you and I would think of it. It's more like, here are some thoughts. Some of it is surface level. There is some depth to this, though.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, 15 minutes, we're done. See you later. Like,
Yeah. Well, I would say it's because the church services for a lot of your more high liturgical churches is more about the sacraments. It's more about
mhm,
what you're doing as opposed to what information you intake, which I think has better longevity to it. Yes, there's always times to
mhm,
learn deeper stuff about the Bible, but
mhm,
after so many years going to the same kind of church, and they're saying stuff that some people are like, oh man, that blew my mind. And you're thinking, man, I heard that 10 years ago. Like eventually it's kind of like the information, even if you go deep, does get repetitive. But that's sort of the point in these settings, which makes it a little bit, I don't know, easier to come back to, I guess. When
Okay.
they're not trying to be like, oh, you probably don't know this. Here's some new information. That's not the point. So it makes it
Mm,
a little bit more digestible, I think.
I like that, more digestible. There's in this message, actually, Pope Francis does talk about tradition and the benefits of tradition, which we'll probably touch on that here in a second. I have no actual reason to believe this, but I'm just asking for your opinion. Do you think he writes his own messages? Do like big church leaders actually write their own messages? Or is it like, you know, the person who writes the president's sermons, the president's speeches?
I think for the Catholic Church, it probably actually is the Pope,
Mm-hmm.
just because of like how their hierarchy works. Like I don't imagine it being seen as okay for somebody else
Like
to write it, if
a
that makes
cardinal
sense.
is handing up a message, think that would
Yeah.
happen. Okay.
Yeah. But I
I,
definitely think at some of these mega churches and stuff, I I don't just think, I know that it happens. I've
okay.
helped somebody write a message for somebody else before. So I've been a part of that technically.
Oh, okay. So you know that. Ooh, insider info. I know that like some churches have more of like a think tank when they write their sermons, which that I'm okay with. But like someone ghostwriting someone else's sermon, I don't know about that.
But if anybody wants to hire a ghostwriter for their sermons, I'm down.
Actually, Josh and I both could probably do that. Man,
Sounds
that's
fun, actually.
yeah, but man, that could be problem. That there's a lot of problems that could happen from that. I do agree with you, though. The more I think about it, when it comes to the Catholic Church specifically, it would make more sense because of how they view the Pope and what he says, that
Hmm.
he probably does write his own messages.
Yeah. Although I wouldn't be surprised if he took a lot from other popes and stuff.
Kind of
If it was
meshed it
like a,
together.
yeah, yeah. Because I mean, that's part of the point, is that you're remembering something. It's not,
Hmm.
let me teach you what Lent is. It is, let me
Hmm.
remind you what Lent is, which Lent itself is really a refocus or a reminder of why we do what we do or who we are as Christians, that kind of stuff. So a reminder that we need to be reminded, I guess. I don't know. I was
A
like, yeah,
reminder to be
makes sense.
reminded. That's good.
Yeah.
Now, before we get into more of the nuance of this message, let me ask you, what is your experience with Lent? Is this a new concept for you? This series has been a little bit of a introduction to the topic. It has been a little bit more teaching, so I'm curious, where are you at on all of this?
Just Lent or fasting in general?
Uh,
I have lots of
okay,
thoughts.
lots of thoughts. Okay, well let's do both because obviously fasting is the biggest thing that is associated with Lent. Although there are four main virtues, but fasting is the one that people
People
usually
remember.
associate. So
Yeah.
yeah, let's do both.
So fasting, I actually fasted a lot back in high school, and it was
Okay.
sort of a, if I give up food enough, and a lot of times it's brought to that where Jesus talks about the king, and if the person bugged the king enough, the king eventually just kind of gave in.
Oh, sure.
That's sort of how I was taught fasting, of like, if you starve yourself enough, it's like a temper tantrum and God will have to pay attention to you.
Wow, that's
And
terrible on multiple levels.
that's sort of how I was taught it, though. That's what I believed it was. So in high school, I'm like, I
Yeesh.
was really distraught and wanted God's direction because I just didn't know what I was doing with my life at all. And I was like, if I starve myself enough, he'll tell me exactly what I need to do.
Okay.
So I fasted a lot then. And not trying to make fun of that because that is what I knew at the time. And I was trying to be in relationship with God the way that I knew how to be. So it's like, yeah, that's terrible. But also, hey, if you did that, that's not a bad thing. It's just that's not what you're supposed to be doing. I don't know. Confusing. But you got to walk out your relationship with God the best that you can with what you know. That's what I was doing at that time. So I don't look bad negatively at that.
Okay.
Weirdly enough, I got really into nutrition during high school for a while and like kind of the embodiment of the soul. And I learned a lot about intermittent fasting and all the health benefits and what it does to your mind. And I'm like, oh, so this is what fasting is. God is actually helping you focus by that's what fasting does to the body physically anyway. Like it actually just translates biologically. And I was like, okay, so that makes a lot of sense. That's how that would work. As I've gotten less healthy, it's become more difficult to fast.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I'm at now. I have had a few years ago, I practiced Yom Kippur for the Jewish holiday. And part of that includes a fast. And this is where I learned about the Isaiah fast. Because you don't just fast, you're also supposed to give a meal to somebody or give something away.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So I'm going to read part of this verse in Isaiah.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I just like it if I can find it.
Sure.
I thought that if I stalled long enough, I would find it by the end of this.
Well, while you look, I will mention, because now you've brought up two different holidays in the Jewish calendar with Yom Kippur and also Jubilee, the year of Jubilee. Talked a little bit about that earlier. There is a plan for when we do hit that 7th year of my seminary life to do a series where we focus on the different holidays and also to take intermittent celebrations and rests throughout that. So stick around. If the show is around for, what is this, end of year 2, 5 more years, we'll get to that. But did you find your verse?
Yes.
All right. Well, let's hear that Isaiah verse.
So it's 58, starting in verse 3, and either through 7 or 8. Haven't decided yet. We'll see as I read.
Okay.
Why have we fasted and you do not see? So this is the Israel people talking to God. Why have we humbled ourselves and you do not notice? Behold, on the day of your fast, you find your desire and drive hard all your workers. Behold, you fast for connection and strife and to strike with a wicked fist. You do not fast like you do today to make your voice heard on high. So basically God's saying you're fasting for your own needs. Is it a fast like this that I desire? So this is God speaking. A day for man to humble himself. Is it for bowing one's head like a reed and for spreading out sackcloth and ashes as a bed? Will you call this a fast, even an acceptable day to the Lord? Kind of implying no. Then he says, is this not the fast that I choose? To loosen the bonds of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free and break every yoke? Is it not to divide your bread with the hungry, and to bring homeless poor into the house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and to not hide yourself from your own flesh? Then your light will break out like the dawn, and your recovery will speedily spring forth, and your righteousness will go before you. The glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Basically, fasting isn't about humbling yourself even, or your desires, or if I bring myself low enough, God will bring me up. It is, how can I help those who are already low doing God's will? And as you do God's will, God will then protect you. But it's about finding God's will, and that is in helping the needy. So that's one thing that I find often missing in Christian fasts that I learned from Yom Kippur was that when in my church growing up, we didn't do Lent, but we fasted we did a certain fast in January every year or something like that. Right.
Okay.
Well, the liturgical church I'm in now, you do Lent. I feel like it's very rarely mentioned this verse where God says, hey, when you fast, what I want you to do is then give your food to the needy, not to just humble yourself. Like that's, it doesn't end there. That's like step 1. Step 2 is then give that away to somebody.
Yeah, and it's sad because actually within Lent, that is one of the main virtues is almsgiving. Usually
Yeah.
what is talked about is the fasting and prayer element, or the fasting and repentance part when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to particularly to Ash Wednesday. But the almsgiving, that has been the part that is often overlooked, and is the part
Mm-hmm.
that I have been trying to focus more on, even if it's just that very like simple intentional thought of how can I specifically love my son or love my wife today, you
Mm-hmm.
know, something like that. But yeah, I agree. Fasting is step one of what should be multiple steps in our rhythm of worship.
Yeah. I like that rhythm of worship thing that you've been harping on. It's nice.
Oh, thank
Um,
you. I
yeah.
don't know who I stole that from. That's not original, but
No, it
so
is. Um,
I feel like then what you're going to say when it comes to Lent is you don't fast.
so this is the first time I've been at a liturgical church during the season of Lent. So
Okay.
this has been fun for me to follow Fish Fridays while I'm doing this too.
Oh,
So
cool.
I went Ash Wednesday, and mind you, I haven't fasted in a while. It's been difficult with some of my health stuff, but I
Mm.
was thinking through, and I was even like on Google, like looking up things that people give up for Lent, and like in my
Hmm.
mind, I was like, this is my first Lent. I want to make it something that's like challenging, but still doable for me. Like, I don't want to set it
Sure.
to where like I absolutely am not going to just not eat for 40 days. I know myself better than that, you
Hmm.
know? And then I'm like, one was like giving up hot water. I'm like, I feel like I'm not really challenging myself. I'm just doing it to say I did it, you know? And I was really, I spent all day Ash Wednesday struggling with this, knowing that I was going to Ash
Hmm.
Wednesday service at like 6 p.m. or whatever. And it's one of those, which is funny. This goes back to our repetitive messages that don't really necessarily have to stand out or anything.
Hmm.
The homily that was given from our minister was really basic, and he just kind of was going back to Lent isn't this like not a verbatim quote, but he said like Lent isn't about giving anything up. It's not about adding something extra to do. It's
Hmm.
refocusing yourself on God. And these are helpful steps to do that sometimes, but not all the time.
Hmm.
So he
Okay.
said, our main goal is that you figure out what it is that helps you refocus. And then I don't know, I was really challenged because I spent all day trying to figure out how I could do the checkbox part of this, you know?
Sure. Sure.
And I know in my head, like intellectually, I know that that's not what Lent's about, and Lent's about refocusing. Like I already knew this thing that he said, but
Hmm.
somehow the way he said it, and then in that moment with some ash on my forehead, I've never done that before. That was interesting. I
Nice.
I'm hearing him say it, and I'm going, oh yeah. And then it just kind of clicked to me where I most refocus and reconnect is when I'm on a hike or when I'm in wilderness. So instead of
Mm.
giving something else up, I'm, checking the box off or doing something new that I haven't done before, which is a good thing to do. Just
Hmm.
it is good to practice other practices. I said, what if I just took this season and did what I know helps me refocus on God? So I've every weekend
Okay.
been going on a hike and just
Very good.
reconnecting to God that way. Yeah.
I like it. Yeah. This is a very intentional time of refocusing for sure. Fasting, prayer, almsgiving, repentance. Like this is
Hiking,
hiking, hiking. Like
apparently.
all of these practices are refocusing. And
Yeah.
maybe that also goes back to the simplicity of the sermons
Yeah.
of, doesn't have to be, you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not trying to do anything special here. You're here to simply remind people this is what we're here to do. We're just here to refocus, remind you that you are dust and that to dust you shall return,
Mhm.
and that you need to repent and refocus on God.
One of the favorite sermon series that I've read, I'd probably give it a 4.5 out of 5 since we're rating sermons now. Martin Lloyd Jones did a series of the Sermon on the Mount. And
Okay.
the reason I liked it so much is that he kept doing, the forest and the trees kind of analogy of like, you don't want to miss the forest for the trees and you don't want to miss the trees for the forest. So he would do
Hmm.
this kind of like overarching, what is this thing about? And then he'd go into some details. And then he'd do another sermon of overarching, what is this thing about? What is these individual things we learned say about the overall point? And
Hmm.
I'm going to get back to, because we're comparing homily from two Protestants. I
Right.
grew up, a lot of those 3-point sermons are to get you to an emotional high or some kind of action the church wants you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Or honestly, a lot of times it's to make a political point more recently. A lot of it
True.
ends up being that. And I think that's what's so refreshing is the homily, which not to say you don't want to not focus on the trees, just like the Martin Lloyd-Jones things. You want to look at the forest and the trees, right? And see how those details uplift the overall story. The homily, what I've liked is that it's kind of let me focus on the overarching thing again. I don't go to church hearing anything about Republicans or Democrats. Instead, I here's the story of transfiguration and what it means. And I'm like, yeah, sometimes that's all I need.
Is just the message.
Yeah.
So on that note, let's get back into Pope Francis's message, because you even referenced the text. We're talking about the transfiguration, which I thought was I did not know that this is a normal thing that people talk about during Lent. I usually hear Jesus in the wilderness messages, not the transfiguration. But let's start with the question that has started every Bible study since the dawn of the Bible study. What stood out to you from this message?
I highlighted something at one point. Let's see. There was a lot. What stood out to me is how he was going back to the thing that you hear a lot in Baptist churches and all that, and Pentecostal churches of, see, this represents the law and this represents the prophet. And I was like, okay, so he's going there, but then he didn't fully dive in. Instead, he took another step back to look at the overarching thing.
Okay.
Let's see. Where is this? Okay, so he says, do not take refuge in religiosity made up of extraordinary events and dramatic experiences out of fear of facing reality and its daily struggles, its hardships and contradictions. I liked that. He's like, hey, let's not fall into this trap of being overly religious, which is funny coming from, most of us, that's just how we label the Catholic Church of, oh yeah, they're the religious part and we're the real Christians because Christianity is a relationship, not a religion, which dumb, but I'm gonna leave that alone. I just like that he was like, hey, let's not fall into the trap of just letting this be a religion.
Also on the note of they're Catholic, but like you just said, I was surprised how many times we were reminded that it's grace that saves us, grace that sustains us, grace that moves us along. They're Catholic. Yeah. They're not supposed to, they don't believe in grace. You have to work for everything, supposedly. So that definitely stood out to me of like, hey, look at all the times. Just not even going to make a mention of it. Look at all the times that grace has come up. I'm also... I don't know, maybe you can relate to this because you also love the Lord of the Rings. Just the language of the journey really stood out to me. That Lent is a journey. I think we definitely see that, whether it's the wilderness, Jesus in the wilderness passage, or here with all the metaphors of going up the mountain for the Mount of Transfiguration. But the journey, we're on a journey during this time of Lent. That really stood out to me as well.
Yeah, not just Lent. Again, my first year attending a Lutheran church, so a lot of things are new to me. The amount of times that they're just focused on the life of Jesus is so weird to me. Because usually you might get a sermon series on one of the Gospels a year, maybe. You'll hear about the birth of Jesus around Christmas, and then we'll have a whole Easter series of 4 weeks talking about the death and resurrection. We don't get a lot of, I didn't get a lot growing up in the Pentecostal Baptist church just about Jesus's life. And I find it interesting that so much of their year just revolves around the life cycle of Jesus.
Right. Basically that's what it is. That's what the church calendar is birth of Jesus, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, Pentecost, Christ is King, rinse, wash, repeat.
Yeah. It's weird to me that it seems a lot more Christ-centered. Right. I feel like I'm on dangerous waters saying that, but it's it kind of feels that way. I don't hear anything about politics. I don't hear anything about, this Old Testament passage and how we could still make it relevant. It's just kind of, we're talking about Jesus.
I want to read that. He talks about tradition. it a lot
Mhm.
in this sermon as well. There's like a specific paragraph here. This is not a long read, folks, if you want to go read this for yourself.
Yeah.
I just wanted to read this quote. Tradition is a source of inspiration for seeking new paths and for avoiding the opposed temptation of immobility and improvised experimentation. And I thought that was really cool because normally when we think about tradition, it's like, well, that's just the thing you do, right? That's like your whole, that's
Mhm.
part of what you've been learning all these years over on Whole Church is like sometimes, we have these traditions because, but from the Pope's position, tradition is actually like the source of both the check and balance of giving you inspiration for new paths to take, like you're going to go for a hike every weekend during Lent to refocus on
Mhm.
God, but also to like safeguard you against wackiness, against misinformed theology, whatever you want, misinformed practices, however you want to put that.
Yeah, I like that it wasn't like the point. I feel like he made it pretty clear. The point is not the tradition. The point is not the practice. The point is focusing on Jesus, and all of these other things are just a vehicle. Like it seems like he just sees that as a way to focus on Jesus to get us to that
Mm-hmm.
other point. And
Yeah.
also he mentions penance a lot. Sorry.
No, he does. He does mention penance a lot. What do you think? We're two Protestants. So what do you
Mhm.
think about penance?
Man, I love the overall story arc was great. Even though I liked Speedball, I liked when he got a little bit
Oh
edgier.
my
You kind of
gosh.
see some of the like darker tones and like his power really
Speedball.
evolved. It was great. That was like a deep cut Marvel
That is
reference.
a deep cut. It's just
um,
it just so happens my brother likes weird Marvel characters that I even knew who Speedball was.
Speedball and Penance, like Robbie Baldwin is just one of my favorite Marvel characters that no one knows who he is, but technically exists in the MCU.
Oh, really?
Technically.
Really?
Because when the Shield show was still a part of the MCU for season 1, they have a plaque with a bunch of people's names on it, and Robbie Baldwin is on the plaque. If you pause it
Oh,
and read all 60 names because you're a crazy person, I don't know why you would do that, but
right.
yeah, he's there.
Right. Cool. That's kind of like when Jim
Yeah.
Hammond, the Human Torch, shows up in the first Captain America movie.
Yeah. But
Anyway, penance.
on a more serious note, on the Catholic version of penance, I don't believe, and this is the more Lutheran I become, the more I lean into like everything Jesus does. We don't really have anything that we do, but I do
Okay.
think there is a part of working out your salvation. It gets very wibbly wobbly, kind of mystery of the faith kind of stuff.
Sure.
Um, so I don't agree that we have to pay penance or anything like that for salvation. But I did think what was interesting when we talked to a Catholic nun on Whole Church once, who I've known for a long time, really cool person. She likes to
Nice.
body surf. It's weird.
Interesting.
It's just a fun thing. Like I know a body surfing nun who's also albino and blind.
Cool.
She's one of the coolest people I know. Yeah, but she pointed out like really the difference is Catholics still believe you're saved only by faith through grace,
Mm-hmm.
and that you have to do the act while God is saving you. Like that's part of the salvation is you're working it out by doing penance. And then at that moment, God is showing grace, and that is how you're saved. Not because of your act, but because of God's. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
Protestants will say, you're saved by grace first, and then you should act like it and do these things. So she's like, really, we're just saying that the actions happen at different points. And I'm like, yeah,
True.
now that I think about it, that is a silly thing to be this up in arms about. How dare you say we do it while we're saved? We do it after we're saved. Are you still going to do it? Cool.
Cool. Yeah, and I think this contributes to. I talked about this on last week's Fish Friday or a couple weeks ago at the when this episode comes out on a biblical view of fasting, talking about how there are just some spiritual disciplines that we don't like doing because it actually requires self-denial.
Oh, that was a
And
good episode.
I think self-denial, and I talked about it in that episode. I think we have this this perverse idea of self-denial because we have a twisted view of what freedom is from our American culture, speaking specifically of American Christians. There are a few international listeners, so I am not trying to like isolate you, even though that's what we love to do as Americans, is pretend like no one else exists. We have a particular view of what freedom is supposed to look like, and therefore to take on disciplines like fasting, like Sabbath rest, where we are saying no. Well, why would we say no? That's not freedom. Like freedom is, we have this idea that like freedom is accepting, whereas denial can also be a form of freedom as well. And I think, again, I'm with you. I don't necessarily think that penance is like something we do to be saved in that understanding of penance, but the intentional self-denial aspect of the Christian faith is really something Protestants and evangelicals might really want to start looking into more.
Yes. One of the things that I like, some things by John Piper, a lot of things by John Piper really irritate me. Mind you, I'm the church unity guy. I'd have unity with him. I'd call him a Christian brother and all that. But I think one thing that he teaches, and I have more problem with the term itself than the actual teaching, but he teaches this thing called Christian hedonism. And I think that's been a huge problem because it really misleads people to thinking that, no, what God wants is your happiness. So God cares about you finding your happiness. And it's like, no, actually, like, yes, God wants people to be happy, but the way you're teaching that is kind of like, I don't know, it gives license for a lot of terrible attitudes, if that makes sense, and kind of makes it feel like what you're saying is the whole Bible and all these things are really just for me and I can live for myself, but in a Christian way. And it's like, that's not, no. The Christian way is to give up of yourself for everybody else. And yes, God wants everyone to, have joy, love, all those things. But he wants you to have that in finding that you give up of yourself, not that you're indulging yourself. And I feel like a lot of his teaching borderline okays that. And that's what I think is really dangerous. And the term itself is kind of dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have time to unpack all of the John Piper Christian hedonism thing. I will just share a brief story of, man, I can remember guys in college like just being so, oh, I'm a Christian hedonist. Like that was their, like earlier we did the Lutheran, Pentecostal, Reformed existentialists. Like that was their thing. I'm a Christian hedonist. And even then I didn't really know much, and it kind of sounded interesting, but it just never really clicked with me. The book is good. I like Desiring God, but the book.
Yeah, me too. It's very much clickbait, right? Christian hedonism. Oh, what's that? That doesn't make sense. Click it. And he tries to like explain it away that's like whatever. And I share part of the concern that Christians don't seem happy enough. We're too stoic. And I think that we do need to be reminded that joy is one of the fruits of the Spirit. Like it's actually okay not to be stressed out all the time or sad about everything.
Yeah.
Or Christians that are just constantly road rage while they drive, I have a problem with. Like, I'm like, no, Christ does desire joy.
Or my favorite, Christian content creators who are constantly just looking for the next thing to get mad about because that's what gets clicks and downloads.
I can't wait for that next revival. I already have an angry speech typed out.
I don't care who it's from. Josh, this is your church. I don't care.
But yeah, in short, any form of hedonism is not Christian.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, John Piper, but
sorry, Johnny P.
But and it goes back to this message, right? That we are doing these traditions or practices of humbling ourselves. We're refocusing on what is, rather than the old law, what is Christ's law for us, right? And that's kind of what some of the penance is about. And, we're talking about the prophecy. What does it mean to avoid religiosity? All these other kind of things. And yeah, that's the opposite of hedonism. If I had to pick John Piper as the Baptist Pope or this Pope, Well, this is
The
at least what Jesus taught.
Is it Piper or MacArthur? Who would be the Baptist Pope?
We'll put a poll up on a Facebook group. I'm back to pretending like this is my show.
Yeah, we will. We will put that poll up. We both will. You'll have more answers, but we'll combine them. So earlier you mentioned one of two Pope Francis's application points, to use the lingo that we're more familiar with, from this passage on the Transfiguration. He says that there are two paths that we can take, and one of them is that path of not getting so caught up in religiosity. Sorry. I had a Shamrock Shake before coming on air. Not a good choice. I mean, it was tasty, but not good for audio. The other one was the one that stood out to me. Is the first proposal then is very clear. We need to listen to Jesus. And he has this whole explanation about the value, the importance, not just value, but the importance of listening to Jesus's voice, to the voice of God, particularly in this season as we keep coming back to being refocused. But also, even he says here, let me pull that back up. He talks about listening to the voices of our brothers and sisters in church and hearing their stories, and also just like this community teaching discipleship type of idea. Let me see if I can pull a good quote from this. Such mutual listening in some phases is the primary goal, but it remains always indispensable in the method and style of the synodal church. So he's basically saying, like, there's a season where this can be even more important, but this is always good. This is always good to be listening to one another and to growing from what each other has to say.
Yes. It had very much church unity vibes to me. It was very much like, is he trying to go ahead and get that invite, or? But no, I mean, I was listening. I'm like, yeah, like we have different stories. We have different paths. He's talking about tradition being a path, and there are different ways of how we focus on this. I really wanted to, be a good Lutheran and, find out what I'm going to give up for fasting and all the other checkbox for this. But instead, my path of refocusing ends up being hiking this year. Maybe next year I'll do a real Lent. We'll see. But it's kind of like, okay, so that's my path and I have a story to tell, and somebody else gave up hot water, even though I thought that wasn't challenging enough. And maybe they have a cool story to tell that I could learn something from,
Sure. Yeah, I was definitely getting like deconstructionist vibes from that, of like actually hearing people out, and nuance and story type of importance. A lot of story and journey metaphors.
Yeah. The wheel's always turning. Great minds think alike, man.
There we go.
So on Systematic Geekology, the other podcast I help with, is we just did an episode about One Piece. And one of the big things is how stories and people's backgrounds really changes how you view characters, right?
Sure.
One character is like a pervert the whole show and you hate him, and then all of a sudden you see his background and it's like, okay, well, I still don't want you to be a pervert, but man, I'm cheering for this guy now. It's like, oh man, okay. Or like, you see one of the biggest baddies out there and they stop to tell her story right before the end, and she's still going to lose because she's the bad guy, but it's like, oh man, she was abandoned as a child, and all of these things happened that kind of is like, oh no, it explains why she is this way. This sucks. Yeah. And I think
I've had that experience before too. You're watching a show and you just really don't like that character, and then the episode happens, or that beat in the movie happens, and you're like, I just still don't like you, but man, I'm a little bit more sympathetic now, at least.
Yeah, makes it easier to love your enemies when you know why they are the way they are. Yeah. And I don't know. That's one where, hey, maybe you're listening to this for no particular reason. You're like, I despise the idea of Lent and penance and all of these tradition things. And you're like, super Protestant. You're the world's most Protestant. But like hearing out some of the stories of how Lent's helping refocusing on Jesus, maybe you don't have the 3-point sermon going through the trees, but people are looking at the bigger picture and hearing the life of Jesus, and you're able to say, no, that's still a good thing. Or vice versa,
Mm-hmm.
It is a good thing to get more into the weeds and details of the Bible too.
It's true. So summarize this homily for us. What would you say is the big summary statement, the big idea, as we call it in the preaching circles?
With tradition or whatever your path is, prepare for Easter.
Okay.
I think that's I'm trying to I feel like I was doing the 10 seconds or less.
Oh, that Patreon thing you guys do on Whole Church.
I feel like my brain went into that mode, but I think that technically checks all the boxes. How would you do it?
I'm trying to think.
10 seconds or less, Brandon.
Ooh, 10 seconds or less. No, thank you. 10 words or less, more like it. Yeah, let's see here. Something along this is also hard because you can't allow for dead air silence on podcasting.
That was more than 10 words, so.
Yeah, I know. On the journey to Easter, we refocus on God in different ways. More than 10 words.
Yeah.
But something along those lines, I would say.
Yeah, it's hard too because he gave two different things, right? He gave two applications, so it's kind of like yes, that, but also there is the other other quick description you could give is don't let traditions or overly focusing on religious practices be a trap for seeing the real meaning of Lent and Easter.
Yeah, that's
I can see both. There's two different sermons in one here.
Yeah. But it doesn't feel clunky, Yeah.
We've all maybe heard it's two 2.5s. Maybe he actually got a 5.
Maybe he did. We've all have heard that sermon though. That's this is two different messages. I didn't really, and it's not good. I didn't really think that this was two different messages. Boy, I can't keep up with this. It flowed still very naturally.
Yeah, I feel like if that first one hit you, you could have missed the second one because you were still digesting what he was saying.
Sure.
Or if you were okay, I'm good there, that second one could have hit you. And it's man, it's like a double hitter.
Double hitter. Love it. Any final thoughts as we start to close out this episode?
We should do more average sermons and homilies.
We should do more average sermons and homilies. Okay.
Stop reinventing or figuring out how can I reference the new Avengers movie in this, or how can whatever new, stop trying to make it relevant and just let Jesus be Jesus. Let's hear the words of Jesus like he says here, right? And focus on his words and not try to put our spin or new take on it.
Okay. I like that. I would also say I preached this in a sermon. I think it came out back in December. Here on the podcast feed. I do find it interesting, and this gets there's safeguards here. This gets into a gray area. I do find it interesting all the times where the Bible talks about going up to meet God. Mm-hmm. This is another instance of we're going up a mountain, specifically with the purpose of having an encounter with Jesus, seeing the glory of Jesus on display for Peter, John, and James, which I know, and this gets into part of the Asbury discussion as well. I'm not one of those people who's oh, you have to go up a mountain. You have never truly experienced God until you go up a mountain, or you have to go to this place where there seems to be the movement of the Holy Spirit. No, the Holy Spirit is with us at all times. We can always be in communication with God then. But there still seems to be this there's coming back to the journey. There's a journey at times where it is good to go up to God, much in how we kneel in prayer, how that's a form of symbolism of what we're trying to do, communication of humility as we come before God. There seems to be this idea, even in Christianity, of, at least in practice, of going up to meet God as a metaphor of drawing near to his glory.
Yeah, it's something I've been focusing on a lot lately. Is just that whole Christ is in all things, working through all things, but also transcendent. So just seeing that he is both an immanent and a transcendent God.
Okay.
Especially, doing these hikes beginning of March, I'm seeing all the new life grow, and I'm like connecting with nature in that way, realizing God is working through this and new life is emerging. And how cool is that? And then also taking time to, it's almost like I'm talking to God about God, like I look, I don't know, this is probably weird, but I look up when I pray sometimes and I'm like talking to God. I'm like, this is actually super cool how you're doing this. And I'm like, very nice, like, God, you're awesome. Yeah.
I like that. That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, let's go ahead and start wrapping this episode up. As always, if you are interested in hearing anything about the whole church or systematic geekology, you can go into the description to find links to that. You also can find, since Josh is here, I'll make sure to plug the every tribe, denomination, and tongue convention. I will post a link in the description for, I believe the tickets are available on Eventbrite, correct? Yes.
That sounds right.
I think when I went to look that up the other day, that's where the site took me. It was Eventbrite. So if you're in the Chapel Hill, North Carolina area and you want to come hang out with me, Josh, TJ, and a whole bunch of other of your favorite Christian podcasters, we're going to be there doing the whole church stuff and talking about Tolkien and politics and the Great Pumpkin and a whole bunch of other things.
Worshiping in like 10 different languages. It's going to be cool.
Is that like a real number? I know there's like a bilingual thing or like a bilingual worship.
It was service. 12 when it was in Charlotte, and I'm reworking it now. So we'll say 10-ish.
10-ish. Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, you can find links to all of that in the description, along with all the usual stuff, the My Seminary Life website, shop, and the GoFundMe. If you want to help me get down to Chapel Hill at the recording of this episode, we are just shy of 50%. So it's coming along. It's been a month. We're only at 50%, or we're already at the 50% mark. So that's I'm pretty impressed, at least. We'll see how it goes. Coming up tomorrow, for all of you who are new around here and you're like, what is this thing that goes on? Usually I talk about the stuff that I'm studying in grad school, but I'm done. So tomorrow, which is when the normal new episodes come out, I will be, it will be the 2-year anniversary special of the show, where I will be talking about, was seminary worth it? Was the past 2 years of my life a waste of time, or was it helpful? So I'm going to talk about that tomorrow.
But I have to wait longer than a day. I feel like this is unfair.
That's true. Because you know what else is happening is I'm going to announce what the summer series is going to be. And now I just teased that for you. And you have to wait all the way until that episode comes out.
This is what happens when you're like an avid listener and then you guest on a show and you're like, wait a minute. That's not fair. I have to wait longer.
I have to wait longer now. Next week on Fish Fridays, today we were very Catholic. Next week, we're going to be Lutheran, as Pastor Will joins the show to give us the Lutheran side of the Lent story, particularly that whole, they're Lutherans. They're kind of the reason we had the Protestant Reformation. So why are you doing this thing that is apparently Catholic? So he's going to be here to explain all of that and more. We recorded that episode even further out, so he's been waiting a while for this one.
I'm just so tired of waiting. Release all your episodes at once. Pull a Netflix.
Pull a Netflix. That's a different way to podcast. Here's an
just drop 30 episodes. A year from now, you could do it again.
I don't even want to think about that. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thank you again, Josh, for being here. This is Brandon signing off, reminding you that theology is best served with a side of coleslaw. See you next time.